Welcome back to Bible Short, the Gospel of Mark, chapter 3. Last week, in chapter 2 of the Gospel of Mark, we heard several stories about things Jesus did that upset many religious leaders. He forgave sins and healed a paralyzed man. He asked a tax collector to become one of his disciples, and then, to make it even worse, Jesus went to the man's house and had dinner with that tax collector and his friends, people everyone would describe as sinners to be avoided, never to eat with. He stuck up for his disciples when they picked and ate some heads of grain as they were walking through a field on the Sabbath, when no one was supposed to do any work. Jesus telling the Pharisees he was Lord of the Sabbath. No matter what Jesus did, important people were upset. But ordinary people flocked to see and hear him. So in Mark chapter 3, what happens? Mark says, "Then Jesus entered the synagogue on the Sabbath, and a man was there who had a withered hand. And scribes and Pharisees were watching him to see whether Jesus would cure him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him of breaking the Jewish law. But Jesus said to the man who had the withered hand, 'Come forward.' Then he said to the scribes and the Pharisees, 'Is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath? To save life or to kill?' But they were silent." Jesus looked around at them with anger. He was grieved at their hardness of heart and said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." The man stretched it out, and the man's hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately conspired with the Herodians how to destroy Jesus. Now, the Herodians and the Pharisees are groups who despise and disagree with each other. The Herodians were a political party who were loyal to the Herodian family, all those King Herods we've been learning about, who had been put in power over the Jewish people by the Romans. They were opposed to the Pharisees, who were primarily concerned with people strictly obeying the Jewish religious laws. But in this case, they were united in their fear and hatred of Jesus. Then Jesus went with his disciples to the shore of the Sea of Galilee, and a great multitude from Galilee followed him. Hearing all that he was doing, they came to him in great numbers from Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, beyond the Jordan, and the region around Tyre and Sidon. He told his disciples to have a boat ready for him because of the crowd, so that they would not crush him, for he had cured many, so that all who had diseases pressed upon him to touch him. And Mark says, whenever the unclean spirits saw him, they fell down before him and shouted, "You are the Son of God!" But he sternly ordered them not to make him known. Jesus then went up the mountainside and called to him those whom he wanted, and they came to him. And he appointed 12 to be with him and to be sent out to preach and to have authority to cast out demons. So he appointed the 12, whom we call the 12 disciples or the 12 apostles. Simon, to whom he gave the nickname Peter, the Rock, Peter's brother Andrew, the brothers James and John, to whom he gave the nickname Sons of Thunder, and Philip and Bartholomew, and Matthew and Thomas, and James the son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, and Simon the Cananean, and Judas Iscariot, who was going to eventually hand him over to his enemies. Then Jesus went back home to Capernaum, and the crowd came together again, so that Jesus and his disciples could not even eat a meal. When Jesus' family heard this, they went out to restrain him, for people were saying, "He's gone out of his mind." And the scribes, the teachers of the law, who had come down from Jerusalem, said, "This Jesus casts out demons and unclean spirits by the power of Beelzebul. By the prince of demons, he is driving out demons." Then Jesus called to them and spoke to them in parables, in stories, saying, "Well, how could Satan cast out Satan? That doesn't make any sense. If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And if a house is divided against itself, that house will not be able to stand. And if Satan has risen up against himself and is divided, he cannot stand, but his end has come. But no one can enter a strong man's house and plunder his property without first tying up the strong man. Then indeed the house can be plundered. Truly, I tell you, Jesus said, people will be forgiven for their sins and for whatever blasphemies they utter. But whoever blasphemes against the Holy Spirit can never have forgiveness, but is guilty of an eternal sin. For they had said, "This Jesus has an unclean spirit." Then Jesus' mother and his brothers arrived and were standing outside trying to see him. A crowd was sitting around Jesus, and they said to him, "Your mother and your brothers are outside asking for you." And Jesus replied, "Who are my mother and my brothers?" And looking at those who sat around him, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother." Remember, his family has been told Jesus was crazy, that he was out of his mind, and they've come to try and rescue him. But Jesus doesn't need rescuing, does he? He knows he has a mission from God, his Father, and he's going to keep loving and healing and proclaiming the good news that God's kingdom is very near. So what happens next? Look for Bible Shorts, episode 145. Mark chapter 4, a big storm.